Tonight, you board a routine overnight flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. There is no storm waiting over the runway. No warning light is glowing in the cockpit. No urgent voice is calling through the cabin. The aircraft is a Boeing 777, one of the most recognizable long-distance passenger aeroplanes in the world, and everything about the departure appears ordinary. The cabin lights are soft. The overhead lockers are closing. Seat belts click into place. A few passengers are still looking at their phones. Others are already leaning against the windows, watching the lights of the airport slide slowly past. The flight is expected to last a little more than 5.5 hours. It will never arrive. Less than 40 minutes after takeoff, the last routine words from the aircraft will pass through the radio. A calm voice will say, "Good night." Soon afterwards, the identifying signal that allows civilian controllers to see the aircraft clearly will disappear. The flight will leave its planned route. It will turn back across Malaysia. It will continue beyond the final military radar contact, moving into a darkness where no conventional tracking system can follow it. But the aircraft will not become completely silent. For hours, a satellite far above the Indian Ocean will continue to exchange brief, automatic signals with equipment aboard the aeroplane. These signals will contain no message from the crew. They will not reveal the aircraft's exact position. They will be little more than electronic acknowledgements, quiet handshakes between a machine in the sky and a machine in space. Those handshakes will become the final thread connecting MH370 to the world. Years of searching will follow. Ships will cross some of the most remote water on Earth. Aircraft will scan the ocean. Specialists will study radar returns, fuel calculations, ocean currents, fragments of debris, and tiny variations in the timing and frequency of satellite transmissions. Still, the main wreckage will remain unfound. Tonight, we will follow the flight through the last hours that can be reconstructed from evidence. We will begin in the bright, ordinary spaces of Kuala Lumpur International Airport. We will enter the quiet cabin, rise above the sleeping coastline, and listen to the final routine communications. Then we will move carefully into the period after contact was lost. The turn, the radar track, the satellite signals, and the vast southern ocean that became the center of the search. Later, we will examine the explanations that have been proposed. Some are technical. Some involve deliberate human action. Some depend upon accidents or failures that cannot be proved. And some belong to the stranger edges of the internet. Stories of secret interception, impossible technology, and even visitors from beyond Earth. Those extraordinary ideas are part of the cultural story that grew around MH370, and we will not pretend they never existed, but we will keep a clear boundary throughout the night. Where evidence exists, we will describe it. Where investigators could only infer, we will say so. And where a theory is unsupported imagination, we will not disguise it as fact. Because this is not only a mystery. There were 239 people aboard the flight, 7 passengers and 12 members of crew. Their families have lived for more than a decade without the certainty that normally follows an aviation accident. This story is told with respect for every person aboard, and for everyone who continues to wait for answers. You are not required to solve the mystery tonight. You do not need to memorize every time, waypoint, or technical term. Let the details arrive gently and pass when they are ready. The story will remain here, moving quietly forward, even if sleep reaches you before the ending. Allow your shoulders to rest a little lower. Let your jaw loosen. Notice the surface beneath you carrying your weight without asking anything in return. And as your breathing finds its own slower rhythm, imagine the low, even sound of an aircraft cabin at night. Air moving through hidden vents, engines humming beyond the walls, and a long, dark sky waiting beyond the glass. The departure board still shows Beijing. The gate is open, and the early hours of 8 March 2014 are about to begin. Before we move towards the aircraft, it may help to understand the quiet agreement behind tonight's story. MH370 has attracted careful investigation, genuine disagreement, and a great deal of speculation. Tonight, we will not force the available evidence into a conclusion it cannot support. We will not invent conversations inside the cockpit or claim to know what passengers saw during hours for which no cabin record survives. When the evidence is firm, we will say so. When investigators could only infer, we will leave room for uncertainty. And when we reach the stranger theories, including the idea of extraterrestrial involvement, we will describe why those stories spread without presenting them as fact. That restraint does not make the mystery smaller. It makes it more honest. A modern airliner is normally surrounded by information. It speaks through radio, identifies itself to radar, sends operational reports, and follows routes divided carefully between controllers. MH370 did not move from visibility into uncertainty in one clean instant. One connection ended, then another. Later, conventional radar ended too. Finally, only automatic satellite signals remained, proving that equipment aboard the aircraft was still responding while revealing almost nothing about the people inside. We will move through those stages slowly enough to understand them, but you do not need to remember every time, waypoint, or technical term. The names may become distant lights along a route: Kuala Lumpur, Igari, Penang, Vampi, Mikar. Notice them if you wish, and then let them pass. There is no test at the end. The story will continue even if sleep reaches you before the final section. You may listen closely while curiosity is awake, and then allow the same words to become softer as the night continues. Take one comfortable breath without forcing it to become deeper than it wants to be. Let the room remain exactly as it is. Small sounds can settle into the background, just as they do inside every night flight. Now hold one simple image. A wide terminal stands beneath a dark tropical sky. Through tall glass windows, aircraft wait under white floodlights. Service vehicles move carefully between painted lines. Beyond the runways, the land has almost disappeared into night. One Boeing 777 is being prepared for Beijing. Its registration is 9MMRO. Its flight number is MH370, and at this point in the story, there is nothing unusual to see. Kuala Lumpur International Airport lies south of the Malaysian capital, surrounded by broad roads, palms, service buildings, and long stretches of runway. Late at night, its scale becomes easier to feel. The crowds thin, shops begin to quieten, reflections lengthen across polished floors. Beyond the glass, aircraft lights move slowly against the darkness. The local date has already changed to 8 March 2014, when flight MH370 prepares to leave. The aircraft assigned to the service is a Boeing 777-200ER. To most passengers, the exact letters and numbers matter little. It is simply a large twin-engined aeroplane built for long journeys. To engineers and flight crews, however, every part of the name carries meaning. The 777 is a wide-bodied aircraft. The 200 identifies the fuselage version. ER means extended range, a design intended to travel great distances efficiently with two powerful engines and a sophisticated network of computers, sensors, radios, and navigation systems. The particular aircraft has been flying since 2002. By the night of MH370, it has accumulated many thousands of hours in the air. Its records show no known defect that investigators would later identify as a clear cause of the disappearance. Its maintenance has been conducted under the required procedures, with one notable issue involving the expired battery of an underwater locator beacon attached to the flight data recorder. That expired battery might have affected how long one recorder beacon could transmit after an accident, but investigators did not find that it caused the event itself. The aircraft has a valid certificate of airworthiness. It is loaded within its permitted weight and balance limits. Fuel has been calculated for the planned flight, reserves included. The scheduled journey to Beijing is expected to take 5 hours and 34 minutes. The flight plan provides endurance of about 7 hours and 31 minutes. Nothing about those numbers appears remarkable during preparation. They are part of the careful arithmetic behind every commercial departure. In the terminal, passengers arrive at the gate carrying the ordinary objects of travel. Jackets folded over arms, small bags with documents and chargers, duty-free purchases, neck pillows, books chosen with more optimism than certainty. Some have traveled through Kuala Lumpur from elsewhere. Some are returning home. Some are beginning journeys that continue beyond Beijing. We will not turn them into characters for entertainment. Their private conversations are not ours to invent. It is enough to remember that every seat represents a complete human life extending far beyond the aircraft. Families, friendships, work, routines, plans, and people expecting a message after landing. The crew arrive through their own sequence of checks and preparations. The captain has decades of flying experience and is authorized as an examiner. The first officer is completing the final phase of training for the Boeing 777 after transitioning from another wide-bodied aircraft. On this flight, the first officer is assigned as the pilot flying, while the captain carries the wider command responsibility. 10 cabin crew members prepare the passenger areas. They check equipment, doors, galleys, and emergency supplies. They review the expected service. They move through a cabin that, for the moment, is bright and empty. There is a particular calm inside an aircraft before boarding begins. Rows of seats wait beneath open overhead lockers. Seat belts lie across cushions. Screens are dark. Pillows and blankets are arranged. The floor has been cleaned. The air carries the neutral scent of fabric, conditioned air, and the last traces of ground servicing. Outside, fuel is loaded. Bags and cargo are placed beneath the cabin. Among the cargo are lithium-ion batteries and a shipment of mangosteens. tropical fruit packed for transport. Both will later attract attention because investigators must examine every unusual detail. Yet, the official investigation finds that the flight did not carry cargo classified as dangerous goods, and the items of interest had been transported on other scheduled services without producing an explanation for the disappearance. This is how a large investigation works when the central evidence is missing. Ordinary objects become questions. A maintenance entry becomes a question. A radio phrase becomes a question. A change in electrical power becomes a question. Investigators cannot begin by choosing the answer they prefer. They must move patiently through systems and records, testing each possibility against what is known. But on the ground in Kuala Lumpur, none of that future attention exists yet. There is only a scheduled flight preparing to leave. At about 10:50 in the evening, local time, the captain signs in for duty. The first officer follows around 25 minutes later. The operations center releases the flight. Weather information, routing, fuel, and aircraft status are reviewed. Clearances will guide the aircraft from the runway through Malaysian airspace towards the boundary where Vietnamese controllers are expected to take responsibility. The route is built from waypoints, invisible positions defined by coordinates rather than towers or roads. To a passenger looking from the window, there is no sign in the sky marking one region from another. But to navigation computers and controllers, the air is organized into routes, levels, sectors, and handover points. One of those points is called Igari. The name is simple. 3 syllables. It will later become inseparable from the mystery. For now, it is only a waypoint northeast of the Malaysian coast, close to the boundary between air traffic control regions. The plan is routine. MH370 will pass Igari, continue towards another waypoint called Betod, and proceed through Vietnamese-controlled airspace on the way north. Near midnight, passengers begin to move down the jet bridge. Imagine joining the slow line. The terminal behind you remains bright. Ahead, the entrance to the aircraft is smaller, warmer, and enclosed. Your boarding pass has already been checked. Wheels of small bags make soft sounds over the floor. A person in front of you pauses to place a phone in a pocket. Someone behind you adjusts the strap of a bag. At the aircraft door, the cabin lighting seems gentle after the terminal. A crew member welcomes each passenger. The aisle divides. Seat numbers rise in sequence. You find a place near the middle of the aircraft, close enough to the wing that part of it can be seen through the window. The seat is familiar in the way aircraft seats are familiar, even when you have never occupied that exact one before. A small table folds into the seat ahead. A reading light waits above. Air moves through a circular vent. You place your belongings where they need to go. You sit, and for a little while, nothing happens except boarding. People find rows. Bags are lifted. Lockers close with muted clicks. The cabin crew help create order from the small confusion. Passengers step aside, sit down, stand again, and finally settle. Through the window, the airport continues its night work. A baggage vehicle pulls away. A light flashes on the wingtip. Ground crew in reflective clothing move beneath the aircraft, small against the scale of the fuselage. You do not need to follow every movement. Let your eyes rest, if they are still open. The detailed work of departure can continue without your attention. A modern aircraft is designed so that hundreds of small tasks can be completed in a practiced order. Doors secured, passenger numbers confirmed, cargo documents checked, clearances received, routes entered, instruments compared, and systems monitored. In the cockpit, displays cast-controlled light across panels and switches. The flight management system contains the route to Beijing. Radios connect the crew with controllers. The transponder is ready to identify the aircraft to secondary surveillance radar, ACARS. The Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System can exchange operational data with the airline through digital messages. Later, the ending of these connections will seem deeply significant, but systems do not appear mysterious when they are working. They simply become part of the background, like the soft flow of air above your seat, like the low movement of voices around you, like the steady airport lights beyond the window. The cabin doors close. The outside world becomes separated by layers of metal, insulation, and glass. The aircraft is ready to leave the gate. At 27 minutes past midnight, the crew request permission to push back and start the engines. From a passenger seat, pushback feels almost too gentle to notice at first. The terminal begins to slide away from the window. The aircraft is not moving under its own power yet. A tug connected to the nose gear guides it backwards into the open space of the apron. Inside, the safety demonstration begins. Seatbelts, exits, oxygen masks, life jackets. The words are familiar enough that many passengers barely hear them. Yet each instruction belongs to a system built from decades of aviation experience. Nothing is included by accident. Every movement has been practiced. How to open a door, how to direct a cabin, how to respond when an ordinary flight becomes something else. Tonight, the demonstration ends in the usual way. The crew check the cabin. The lights are adjusted. The engines begin to turn. A large turbofan engine does not simply switch from silence to full power. Air begins moving through the enormous front fan. Internal compressors gather speed. Fuel and ignition bring the core to life. The sound deepens and stabilizes until it becomes the broad, continuous vibration that will accompany the aircraft through the night. One engine starts, then the other. The tug disconnects. Ground personnel step back and signal that the aircraft is clear. MH370 begins to taxi. Outside, blue taxiway lights mark edges in the darkness. Green centerline lights trace paths across the pavement. Illuminated signs identify routes that mean little to passengers but guide crews precisely through the airport. The aircraft turns slowly, its nose following the taxiway, while the main landing gear traces a wider curve behind. Through the window, other aircraft appear and disappear between terminal buildings. Some are arriving, their passengers already reaching for phones. Others are waiting for their own journeys to begin. There is no reason to believe this departure will be remembered differently. That is worth holding for a moment. The mystery of MH370 has become so large that it can make the ordinary beginning feel like a warning. But the people aboard did not enter a symbol. They entered an aeroplane. The crew did not prepare for a legend. They prepared for a scheduled service. The controllers did not hear a mystery speaking through the radio. They heard another flight moving through a busy night. Knowing the ending changes the way we look backwards. We search each routine detail for hidden meaning. We wonder whether a pause was too long, whether a phrase was unusual, whether someone knew something that the record cannot show. The official investigation listened carefully to the available radio transmissions. It found no evidence of anxiety or stress in the voices. The communications conformed to routine procedure. That calmness is not proof that nothing was wrong. It only tells us what can be heard, and what can be heard during the departure from Kuala Lumpur is ordinary. The aircraft approaches runway 32 right. The number refers to its magnetic direction, roughly towards the northwest. The word right distinguishes it from a parallel runway. Ahead, the long strip of lights extends into darkness. At 12:40 in the morning, the controller clears MH370 for takeoff. The crew acknowledge. The aircraft turns onto the runway. For a few seconds, it waits aligned with the centerline. The runway lights seem to converge in the distance. The engines hold a lower sound. The cabin is still. Then, thrust increases. The hum becomes a deep, controlled roar. Your body is pressed gently into the seat as the aircraft gathers speed. Lines and lights pass more quickly. The terminal, once large and bright, becomes peripheral. The wings carry fuel and flex under the changing forces. The first officer, assigned as pilot flying, guides the aircraft through the takeoff. The captain monitors. Airspeed rises. At the calculated moment, the nose lifts. The vibration of the runway ends. The ground falls away. Kuala Lumpur becomes a field of lights beneath the wing. For a passenger, takeoff can feel dramatic even when it is completely normal. The angle of the cabin changes. The engines remain powerful. A turn may tilt the horizon. Buildings and roads become patterns. Then cloud or darkness removes the detail, and the aircraft enters a world defined mostly by instruments. The landing gear retracts into the fuselage. Flaps are gradually adjusted as speed increases. The aircraft climbs through layers of warm night air towards its cruising altitude. In the cabin, the seatbelt sign remains illuminated. The crew stay seated. Passengers watch the lights below, or close their eyes, or look at screens that have begun to glow in the dimmer cabin. The engines settle into a smoother note as the climb continues. This low, steady sound can be your anchor for the next part of the story. You do not need to picture every instrument or follow every number. Simply imagine the aircraft rising through darkness, held by the flow of air over its wings, while the city becomes smaller behind it. A soft pressure rests against the back of your seat. The cabin air is cool. The window is dark, except for the occasional reflection of an interior light. Far below, the last dense clusters of Kuala Lumpur fade into scattered points. The aircraft contacts the next controller as it climbs. Frequencies change. Instructions are read back. The Boeing 777 moves through the planned departure route, guided by its navigation system and monitored from the ground. At 12:50, approximately 10 minutes after takeoff, MH370 is cleared to climb to flight level 350, about 35,000 feet. The crew acknowledge the instruction. The aircraft continues upwards. At this altitude, the air outside is thin and extremely cold. Inside, pressurization keeps the cabin within a range people can tolerate comfortably. Air conditioning systems regulate temperature and airflow. The physical environment of the passengers becomes almost entirely artificial. Pressure, warmth, light, and sound maintained within a metal body traveling at hundreds of miles per hour. Usually, none of this needs to be considered. You sit beneath a reading light and trust the systems around you. Soon, the seatbelt sign may be switched off. The cabin crew will begin moving. A service cart may appear. Some passengers will remove shoes, unfold blankets, or lower seat backs. The departure will give way to the long middle of the flight, and beyond the windows, there will be almost nothing to see, only darkness, occasional lights far below, perhaps the faint edge of the wing, and the regular pulse of a navigation light reflecting for an instant against the night. Let that rhythm slow the story. Light, darkness, light again. The aircraft climbs towards 35,000 feet. Everything remains on course. Once the aircraft reaches its assigned cruising level, the physical sensation of flight becomes quieter. The climb ends. The angle of the floor returns to level. Engine power reduces to what is required for cruise. Small vibrations remain, but the dramatic movement of departure is gone. At 35,000 feet, MH370 is moving northeast towards the South China Sea. The cabin begins to settle into its overnight pattern. The bright lights used for boarding have been lowered. Pools of warmer light remain above a few seats. Screens glow in the darkness. Curtains around service areas are drawn and opened. Cabin crew move with the practiced balance of people accustomed to working on a floor that is never perfectly still. Some passengers are awake enough to notice the first stage of the flight. Others have already begun drifting towards sleep. You may do the same. You do not need to stay ahead of the story. It can move beside you. Beneath the apparent calm, the aircraft is communicating in several different ways. Radio allows voices to pass between the cockpit and air traffic controllers. The transponder replies to interrogations from secondary radar, providing an identifying code and altitude information. ACARS sends digital reports that can include position, fuel, and aircraft data. Satellite equipment stands ready to carry communications beyond the range of ground-based radio. These systems overlap, but they are not identical. Losing one does not automatically mean losing all of them. That detail will become important later because the disappearance of MH370 from normal tracking did not occur as one simple switch from visible to invisible. The last automatic ACARS position report is transmitted at 1:07:29 in the morning, Malaysian time. It records the aircraft at approximately 35,000 feet with tens of thousands of kilograms of fuel remaining. The message does not contain an emergency. It does not report a defect. It is a normal operational transmission. The next routine ACARS report, expected about half an hour later, will never arrive. But no one in the cabin hears the ending of that digital sequence. There is no audible signal for passengers when an automatic report is sent. There is no announcement when the next one fails to appear. The cabin continues beneath the low engine sound. At 1:1, and again shortly before 1:8, a voice from MH370 reports that the aircraft is maintaining flight level 350. The official investigation later identifies the speaker as the captain. The repeated report attracts attention because repetition can appear meaningful when viewed after a disappearance. Yet, investigators do not establish a reason that transforms it into a warning. Air traffic communications contain corrections, confirmations, repeated clearances, and ordinary variations. The voice remains calm. The aircraft continues towards Igari. On a map, the route is a narrow line. From inside the cabin, the route is invisible. There are no road signs in the darkness. No border appears beneath the wing. Air traffic control regions meet at coordinates known to crews and controllers, while passengers pass from one jurisdiction to another without sensing the boundary. Ahead lies the point where Kuala Lumpur is expected to hand MH370 to Ho Chi Minh Area Control Center. This is routine. Controllers do not follow one aircraft from departure to destination across entire continents. Responsibility moves from sector to sector. A controller instructs the crew to contact the next frequency. The crew read back the number and establish contact with the next unit. Thousands of flights make such transitions without difficulty. Yet boundaries can also create moments of uncertainty when something goes wrong. One controller may believe an aircraft is contacting the next sector. The next sector may expect it to appear and call. If the aircraft does not make contact, coordination should reveal the problem quickly. But human systems are not instantaneous, and assumptions can persist longer than they should. For now, nothing has visibly gone wrong. Imagine the cabin around 1:10 in the morning. The departure excitement has passed. The air is cooler than it was at the gate. A blanket rests lightly across your legs. The window shade may still be open, but there is little to see. The wing is a dark shape, occasionally edged by light. The engine note does not rise or fall dramatically. It remains a broad, continuous presence, powerful, distant, almost soothing when heard long enough. You may allow your breathing to match nothing but itself. No need to count. No need to control it. A breath arrives. A breath leaves. The aircraft continues. In the cockpit, navigation displays show the planned route ahead. Igari approaches. Beyond it lies Baitod and the path towards Vietnam and China. The flight has been airborne for a little more than half an hour. The distance already traveled is considerable, yet the journey is still near its beginning. This is the last period in which the story remains entirely ordinary. There is a temptation to search it for a final, peaceful moment, a precise second before everything changes. But real events rarely arrange themselves so neatly. Systems stop at different times. Information reaches different people at different moments. The point at which investigators can see a change is not necessarily the point at which the cause began, so we will resist creating a dramatic countdown. There is no evidence of a visible clock running towards disaster inside the cabin. There is only a flight approaching a waypoint, a controller preparing a handover, a radio waiting for the next frequency, and a sky that gives no sign of what is about to become unknown. At 1:19:30, Kuala Lumpur radar instructs MH370 to contact Ho Chi Minh on a new radio frequency. The response is calm. Good night, Malaysian 370. The crew do not read back the new frequency, Something the investigation notes was not consistent with the previous frequency changes. But the investigators cannot determine why the readback is absent. The phrase itself is not a distress call. It contains no warning. It is a routine farewell between an aircraft and a controller. Those are the last recorded words received from MH370. For a moment, let them remain exactly what they were. Not a prophecy, not a coded message, just a calm voice in the night saying good night. After the final radio transmission, MH370 is expected to call Ho Chi Minh Area Control Center. It does not. A controller in Vietnam sees the aircraft's radar symbol near the boundary. Then the symbol disappears. At approximately 1:20 and 36 seconds in the morning, the transponder signal is lost from the civilian air traffic control display. To understand what that means, it helps to separate two kinds of radar. Primary radar sends out energy and listens for reflections from physical objects. It may detect an aircraft as a simple return, a point or blip, without requiring cooperation from the aircraft. Secondary surveillance radar works with the aircraft's transponder. The ground system interrogates, and the transponder replies with useful information such as identity and altitude on a controller's screen. This cooperation makes the aircraft easier to identify and manage. When MH370's transponder stops replying, the clear labeled target used by civilian controllers disappears. But the aircraft itself does not disappear from the sky. It continues moving. No distress call is received. No emergency transponder code appears. No message explains the loss of identification. Almost immediately, a crucial ambiguity opens. The aircraft has been told to leave one controller and contact another. Kuala Lumpur expects the handover to occur. Ho Chi Minh expects the aircraft to call. The normal chain has broken at the boundary between them. The Vietnamese controller attempts to establish contact. Other aircraft are asked to call MH370. Messages are relayed. No reply comes. From the cabin, however, we cannot know what is happening. This is where responsible storytelling must become quieter rather than more dramatic. There is no surviving recording from inside the aircraft. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder remain with the missing wreckage. We do not know whether the cabin remained calm, whether an emergency was developing, whether anyone attempted an action that left no external trace, or whether the passengers noticed a change at all. Any confident scene placed inside those minutes would be invention. So instead of imagining voices we cannot hear, we will remain outside the aircraft, following the fragments that reach the ground. At about 1:21, military radar records a return near the aircraft's known position. The return then begins a change that cannot be reconciled with the filed route to Beijing. The aeroplane turns. The official investigation later concludes that the change in flight path likely resulted from manual inputs. Simulator work suggests that the initial turn back was probably made under manual control rather than by the autopilot alone. Yet the available evidence cannot establish who made the input or why. This distinction matters. A likely manual turn is not the same as proof of a particular person's intention. The investigation cannot determine whether the aircraft was flown only by the designated pilots. It also states that intervention by a third party cannot be excluded. The absence of wreckage and recorder data prevents certainty. The turn takes MH370 away from the route to Beijing and back towards Peninsular Malaysia. On the civilian displays used for normal air traffic control, the labeled aircraft has gone. On military radar, an unidentified primary target continues. Later analysis connects that target to MH370 based on its timing, position, direction, and behavior. The useful radar information is mainly the sequence of latitude and longitude positions. Some recorded altitude and speed values vary beyond the aircraft's capabilities and are treated as unreliable because of the limitations and errors of the radar data. This is another important layer of the mystery. A radar return can be evidence without being perfect evidence. It may show where an object moved while failing to provide a trustworthy altitude. It may preserve a track while losing identity. Investigators must separate what the system can support from what it cannot. The target moves westward. The aircraft passes back towards the east coast of Malaysia in the region of Kota Baru, then continues across the peninsula. Below, the land is dark but not empty. Towns, roads, and coastlines lie beneath the flight path. Airports capable of receiving a large aircraft exist within the broader region, yet no landing occurs. No controller hears an emergency declaration. No radar label returns to identify the aircraft to civilian traffic systems. The flight is now traveling in almost the opposite direction from Beijing. In the cabin of our careful reconstruction, the engine sound remains the only thing we are permitted to carry with certainty. The aircraft is still flying. The satellite evidence will later show that it remains airborne for hours. The exact conditions inside are unknown. You do not need to fill that unknown space. Let it remain unoccupied. Let the story rest on what the instruments outside the aircraft can tell us. A point crosses the peninsula. A controller calls and receives silence. Another aircraft attempts contact. The planned route continues northeast without MH370. On schedules and computer systems, the flight still has a destination. In physical space, it has left the path that would take it there. As minutes pass, the absence of communication should become an escalating emergency. Procedures exist for uncertainty, alert, and distress phases. The final investigation later identifies delays and deficiencies in the coordination and initiation of emergency responses. Different units exchange calls. Assumptions are made about whether the aircraft has entered another region, diverted, or continued without communication. The full machinery of search and rescue does not begin at the instant the transponder disappears. Instead, uncertainty expands. 1 minute becomes several. Several become more. A flight that should be visible between two systems is not where either side expects it to be. Imagine, without tension, the map becoming less certain. The bright, planned line to Beijing remains fixed. The actual aircraft moves away from it, and between those two lines, the mystery begins to take shape. You may still be listening closely, or the technical words may already be softening around the edges. Either is fine. There is nothing you need to solve tonight. The story will hold the details for you. The aircraft crosses Malaysia beneath a dark sky, moving west. The westward path of the radar target carries it across Peninsular Malaysia. This is not the route of a confused aircraft making a small correction. It is a sustained departure from the flight plan. Radar positions later reviewed by investigators show a track moving from the region near Igari back towards the Malaysian mainland. The aircraft crosses the peninsula and continues towards the west coast. The night below contains familiar geography. The narrow landmass of Malaysia, the lights of towns, mountain ranges hidden in darkness, and coastlines opening towards the Strait of Malacca. South of Penang Island, the track changes again. The target turns towards the northwest. Flight simulator sessions conducted during the investigation attempt to recreate the turns using the known radar positions. The work cannot reveal intention, but it helps investigators understand what kinds of control inputs might produce the observed path. Their analysis concludes that the initial turn back was likely flown manually. The route south of Penang and onward towards established airways also appears difficult to explain through a simple anomalous system issue alone. Still, difficulty is not certainty. Without the recorders, investigators cannot recover the cockpit sequence. They cannot see switch positions, control movements, warnings, or spoken words. They cannot know whether the path resulted from deliberate navigation, emergency response, coercion, incapacitation, followed by automation, or a chain no surviving theory has fully reconstructed. All they have is the path itself. A path can feel almost like handwriting. It contains curves, headings, and choices. But without the writer, interpretation remains uncertain. Near Penang, later commentators will attach emotional meaning to the route, suggesting that the aircraft may have passed close to familiar places. Such claims are difficult to prove and easy to exaggerate. The official record supports the geography of the track, not the private meaning behind it. So we continue without inventing motive. The target flies northwest and joins the area of an established route near a waypoint called Vampi. It proceeds towards Mika. These names are not towns. They are navigation points in the sky, coordinates used to organize flight paths. To a sleeping passenger, they would be nothing. To investigators, they provide a framework for describing the final portion of the radar track. At 2:22 and 12 seconds in the morning, Malaysian time, the primary radar target ends about 10 nautical miles beyond Mekar. This is the final primary radar contact associated with MH370. The aircraft has now been airborne for about 1 hour and 40 minutes. It is northwest of Peninsular Malaysia, moving away from the last densely monitored part of its route. Beyond this point, conventional radar no longer provides a continuous track. For the next several hours, the flight enters a different kind of evidence. There will be no line drawn point by point across a radar display. There will be no voice report. There will be no automatic ACARS position message. Instead, specialists will later reconstruct possible movement from brief exchanges with a satellite. Before we follow those signals, remain for a moment at the edge of radar coverage. The Strait of Malacca lies below, one of the world's busiest maritime passages. Ships move through the dark water. Coastal lights are visible at great distances under clear conditions. Yet no confirmed eyewitness report will provide the missing aircraft's location. The radar return fades. The screen no longer carries it. But high above the ocean, the Boeing 777 continues. At this point, the ordinary methods of locating an airliner have narrowed dramatically. The aircraft is not following its filed route. Its transponder is not providing identity and altitude to civilian radar. Its crew are not speaking. Its automatic operational reports have stopped. There is, however, a satellite communication terminal aboard the aircraft. And at 2:25 in the morning, only a few minutes after the final radar contact, that terminal initiates a log-on request. The event suggests that satellite communication equipment has powered up after an interruption in electrical supply. Why the interruption occurred is unknown. The official investigation considers power bus cycling a likely explanation for the interruption before the 2:25 log-on, but cannot identify the reason behind it. The aircraft is not using the connection to send a position report or a message from the crew. It is simply reconnecting. This small automatic act will become enormously important. A system aboard the aircraft reaches towards the satellite. The satellite responds. A ground station records the exchange. No one listening in real time understands that these technical records will become the main evidence for the final 6 hours of the flight. To most of the world, MH370 is already missing. To the satellite network, it is still a terminal that can answer. Let the idea become simple. A dark aircraft beyond radar, a satellite far above the Indian Ocean. Between them, a signal too small to carry a human voice, yet strong enough to prove that the aircraft remains in the sky. The story becomes wider now. Land falls behind, the ocean opens, and the final known path turns into a series of arcs. The satellite evidence in the MH370 investigation is often described as a series of handshakes. The word makes the process sound almost human, but the exchanges are automatic. A ground station checks whether the aircraft's satellite terminal remains available. The equipment aboard the aircraft responds. The system records technical measurements associated with the signal. The satellite was not designed to function as a precise aircraft tracking device. It could not simply display a dot, showing MH370's exact location. Yet the signal traveled a measurable distance. It took a measurable amount of time. Its frequency was affected by motion. From those small effects, engineers could infer far more than anyone initially expected. One measurement, called burst timing offset, relates to the time required for the signal to travel from the ground station to the satellite, then to the aircraft, and back through the system. Because radio waves travel at a known speed, the timing helps estimate the distance between the aircraft and the satellite. Distance alone does not produce one location. It produces a ring of possible locations across the surface of the Earth. The aircraft might be anywhere along that ring, provided other constraints allow it to be there. When speed and previous position are considered, impossible portions of the ring can be removed, leaving arcs. Another measurement, burst frequency offset, reflects the difference between the expected signal frequency and the frequency received. Motion creates Doppler effects. The satellite itself is moving slightly. The aircraft is moving. Equipment introduces additional characteristics. Specialists model these components and compare possible flight paths with the recorded values. This work is complex. For sleep, you may allow the technical terms to pass without holding them. Timing suggests distance. Frequency suggests motion. Together, they narrow possibility. That is enough. After the radar track ends, the aircraft and ground station participate in several satellite exchanges. Each handshake places MH370 somewhere along a new arc at a particular time. The arcs do not reveal what happened aboard. They do not identify who controlled the aircraft. They do not provide altitude with certainty, but they show that the aircraft continued flying for approximately 6 more hours after the final primary radar contact. This single conclusion transforms the search. The aeroplane did not simply fall into the Strait of Malacca when radar ended. It traveled onwards. Possible routes initially extend both north and south. Analysts compare the signal measurements, aircraft performance, fuel endurance, satellite geometry, and other evidence. Over time, the southern route towards the Indian Ocean becomes the focus. The destination is not a place in the ordinary sense. It is a remote expanse of water, far from major cities and common flight routes, where the seabed drops into ridges, plains, and deep underwater terrain. At intervals through the night, the satellite system continues its quiet checks. No human message accompanies them. At one point, ground-to-air telephone calls are attempted through the satellite connection. They are not answered. The aircraft remains electronically present and humanly silent. Imagine the vast difference in scale. Inside the aircraft, rows of seats, narrow aisles, overhead lockers, and familiar objects occupy a space measured in meters. Outside, the possible location stretches across arcs thousands of kilometers long. Above, a satellite receives a signal. Below, an ocean waits in darkness. The engines continue consuming fuel. The aircraft's exact speed and altitude are not recorded in a form that resolves the route completely. Analysts construct candidate paths that fit the timing and frequency data while remaining within the Boeing 777's performance limits. Every path is an attempt to answer the same question. Where could the aircraft have been when each signal arrived? The answer is never one point. It is a narrowing field of possibilities. This uncertainty is one reason searching for MH370 has been so difficult. In many aviation accidents, the final position is known within a relatively small area. Radar may track the aircraft until the end. Automatic systems may transmit coordinates and fault messages. Witnesses or floating debris may identify the impact region quickly. MH370 provided none of those advantages during the critical first hours. The satellite records were recognized and analyzed, but they required unfamiliar methods. The possible area shifted as calculations were refined. The southern Indian Ocean was remote. Weather and sea conditions were severe. By the time the surface search focused on the relevant region, floating material could have sunk, scattered, or drifted far from the impact point. For now, however, the search has not yet begun. The aircraft is still in flight. The night continues hour after hour. The cabin, whatever its condition, remains beyond observation. So allow the outside world to carry the scene. A line of moonlight may lie across the ocean, though cloud and weather vary across such a vast distance. The sky above the aircraft is darker than the sky seen from a city. The horizon is almost impossible to distinguish. The engine sound continues until fuel can no longer sustain it. At 8 19 in the morning, Malaysian time, the satellite system receives the final series of signals associated with MH370. The first is a log-on request initiated by the aircraft, consistent with the satellite communication equipment powering up after another interruption. Investigators consider fuel exhaustion a likely reason for this final power interruption. The loss of both engines would remove their generators. The auxiliary power unit may then have started automatically and powered the satellite equipment long enough to attempt reconnection. A final, partial exchange follows. This last communication defines what became known as the seventh arc. By then, the aircraft has been airborne for about 7 hours and 37 minutes. The fuel planned for the flight is near its limit. The official analysis considers the aircraft to have reached the seventh arc near the end of flight, likely after fuel exhaustion and during descent. But the exact final motion remains unknown. Was the aircraft controlled at the end? Was it descending without effective human input? How far did it travel after the final signal? What attitude did it have when it met the ocean? The available evidence cannot fully answer. The main wreckage and recorders would be needed. The satellite falls silent. No eighth arc is recorded, and somewhere along an immense curve in the southern Indian Ocean, the evidentiary trail ends. You may let the silence remain gentle. There is no need to imagine the impact. There is no need to create a final cabin scene that no one can verify. For this part of the night, it is enough to picture the signal ending, the ocean continuing beneath the morning sky, and the world still waiting for an aircraft that will not arrive in Beijing. The story will now move away from the flight itself. When we continue, we will enter the hours of confusion on the ground, the first searches in the wrong places, the discovery of the satellite evidence, and the long movement south towards one of the most difficult search areas on Earth. But for a moment longer, remain with the steady quiet that has carried us here. The engine sound is gone from the evidence. The satellite has stopped listening. The ocean is wide, and you can rest while the story waits at the edge of the seventh arc. While the final satellite signals are being recorded far to the south, Beijing Capital International Airport is preparing for a normal arrival. Flight MH370 is scheduled to land in the early morning. An arriving long-distance flight creates activity before its wheels touch the runway. A gate is assigned. Ground staff prepare. Baggage systems wait. Screens display the expected time. Drivers and relatives watch the arrival's information. Phones are kept close because a message may come as soon as the aircraft lands. At first, delay is an ordinary possibility. Aircraft arrive late for many reasons: weather, congestion, rerouting, or operational problems. A few minutes do not immediately become catastrophe. But MH370 is not approaching Beijing. It has not spoken to a controller for hours. Its transponder has been absent from civilian radar since shortly after the handover near Igari. Its final primary radar return ended northwest of Malaysia. Its satellite terminal has continued answering automated checks while the aircraft traveled into the southern Indian Ocean. Most of the people waiting in Beijing do not know any of this. They see only a flight that has not arrived. This difference between the hidden technical record and the public experience is one of the strangest features of the night. Information exists, but it is scattered across systems, organizations, and countries. No single screen presents the complete story in real time. Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control has the memory of the final radio exchange and the loss of the labeled radar target. Ho Chi Minh Control has the failed handover. Military radar systems have recorded an unidentified primary track crossing Malaysia, but that information has not yet been assembled into the public understanding of the flight. The airline has operational records and attempts to reach the aircraft. Inmarsat's network has stored technical data that will only later be recognized as a map hidden inside timing and frequency measurements. Each piece is small. The pattern does not yet exist. During the hours after contact is lost, controllers and airline staff exchange calls and messages. The final safety investigation will later describe delays, uncertainty, and failures to follow alerting procedures promptly. The organizations involved do not immediately begin a search along the path that will eventually become central to the case. Instead, the first attention remains closer to the planned route. That is understandable in one sense. An aircraft traveling from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing is expected to be somewhere northeast of Malaysia, not thousands of kilometers into the southern Indian Ocean. The last normal civilian radar position lies near the boundary with Vietnamese airspace. Without a complete understanding of the turnback and the satellite data, the South China Sea appears to be the natural place to look. But every hour matters after an accident over water. Floating debris spreads. Currents begin moving objects away from their origin. Underwater locator beacons attached to flight recorders have limited battery life. Search aircraft must cover enormous areas while daylight, weather, and fuel constrain every mission. At 7:24 in the morning, Malaysian time, Malaysia Airlines announces that contact with flight MH370 was lost at 2:40. That time will later be corrected as the sequence becomes clearer. The first public statement confirms the central fear before it can explain it. An aircraft carrying 239 people is missing. At Beijing Airport, uncertainty becomes visible. Families and friends are moved away from the public arrival areas. Airline representatives begin the painful work of responding to people who want information that does not yet exist. News organizations gather. Cameras appear. Rumors move more quickly than verified facts. A missing aircraft creates a vacuum, and a vacuum attracts stories. A diversion, a secret landing, a hijacking, a catastrophic failure, a communication problem. Each possibility feels urgent because no wreckage has been seen and no distress call has been heard. The absence of debris initially leaves room for hope. Perhaps the aircraft has landed somewhere remote. Perhaps communications failed. Perhaps the crew followed a procedure that will soon be understood. Hope and fear occupy the same space. For the families, time does not pass like ordinary time. A minute can contain a complete imagined future. A phone vibration can stop a conversation. Every official announcement can seem too slow, too cautious, or too incomplete. We will not recreate those private moments. It is enough to acknowledge their weight. The mystery that fascinates the world is, for the families, not an abstract puzzle. It is the absence of people they love. As the morning develops, countries around the region begin contributing ships and aircraft. Search areas are drawn around the Gulf of Thailand and the South China Sea. Crews scan water for fuel, life rafts, luggage, aluminium, or any object that might belong to an aircraft. From the air, searching the ocean is harder than it appears on a map. Sunlight reflects from waves. Cloud shadows create dark patches. Whitecaps resemble floating objects. Fishing equipment, rubbish, seaweed, and the wakes of ships produce false alarms. An object seen once may be impossible to find again. Coordinates must be relayed. Aircraft have limited time over the search zone before returning for fuel. Ships move more slowly, but can examine objects directly. Again and again, possible debris is reported. Again and again. It proves unrelated. The search also begins west of Malaysia, as military radar information about the turn back becomes part of the investigation. The geography of uncertainty doubles. Teams look east along the expected route and west along the newly understood radar path. Yet the aircraft has traveled far beyond both. This is where the satellite handshakes begin to change the story. Engineers at Inmarsat examine logs from the network. The company operates satellites that carry communications for aircraft and ships across huge regions. Its ground station has recorded the automated exchanges from MH370, including the final log-on near the estimated time of fuel exhaustion. At first, the data does not look like a flight track. There are no coordinates, only times, frequencies, and system records. But specialists understand that the signals contain geometry. The time delay between transmission and response relates to distance from the satellite. The frequency shift relates partly to movement. By comparing MH370's values with known aircraft and modeling the satellite's own motion, analysts can begin constructing possible corridors. The result is astonishing. The aircraft appears to have remained airborne long after it vanished from radar. The search near the last normal position is not enough. The map must become much larger. For the listener, the story can remain small for another moment. A quiet arrivals hall before dawn, a flight number on a screen, a gate that will not receive an aircraft. You may let the details drift past like distant announcements in a terminal. Nothing needs to be held tightly. The world is only beginning to understand how far MH370 may have traveled. By the time morning reaches Beijing, the search has already begun in the wrong direction. The aircraft was expected to arrive shortly after 6 in the morning. Families wait beyond the arrival's doors. Airline staff check systems and make calls. The scheduled time passes, then the margin in which a routine delay might still explain the silence. At 7:24 Malaysian time, Malaysia Airlines announces that contact with MH370 has been lost. At first, attention remains close to the route the aircraft should have followed across the South China Sea. Ships and aircraft search between Malaysia and Vietnam. Floating objects are reported, photographed, and investigated. Oil slicks are sampled. None can be confirmed as evidence from the missing Boeing 777. Then military radar changes the shape of the search. The unidentified primary target, recorded after the transponder disappeared, appears to have turned back across peninsular Malaysia and continued into the Strait of Malacca. Search areas widen westward. The possibility that the aircraft remained airborne far longer than first believed grows more difficult to ignore. The decisive change comes from the automatic satellite communications. Engineers at Inmarsat and investigators in several countries study the timing and frequency of the handshakes described earlier. The timing measurement places the aircraft at a particular distance from the satellite at each exchange, creating broad arcs across the Earth. At first, two general corridors remain possible. One extends north across Asia, the other curves south into the Indian Ocean. Other evidence must decide between them. A northern route would have crossed or approached heavily monitored airspace in several countries. No convincing radar trail, landing, or wreckage appears there. The subtle frequency shifts within the satellite signals also fit a southern path more closely. The analysis is unfamiliar and difficult because the system was never designed to track an aircraft this way. Yet, piece by piece, the southern corridor becomes the stronger conclusion. On 24 March 2014, Malaysia's Prime Minister announces that the available analysis indicates the flight ended in the southern Indian Ocean west of Australia. For the families, the announcement removes one kind of hope without providing the certainty that normally replaces it. There is still no main wreckage, no flight recorder, no confirmed final position, only an immense ocean and a mathematical arc. The search now moves towards water that seems almost designed to resist it. Much of the region lies thousands of kilometers from the nearest suitable port. Search aircraft must spend hours reaching the area, leaving limited time above it before fuel requires them to turn back. Ships face high swells, strong winds, and weather that can close over the horizon with little warning. The transition is not immediate. During the first days, several countries are searching different seas, working from information that is changing faster than ships and aircraft can be repositioned. Each new radar disclosure alters the map. Each reinterpretation of the satellite data moves attention farther from the route originally filed with air traffic control. The surface search begins in the Australian search and rescue region 10 days after the disappearance. By then, any floating material may have dispersed. Some pieces may have sunk. Others may already be moving north and west under the combined influence of wind, current, and waves. Satellite images reveal shapes that might be debris. Aircraft are sent to inspect them. Ships recover objects from the water. Each possibility is examined, and each is eventually ruled out. In April, another clue briefly concentrates the search. Vessels towing specialized listening equipment detect acoustic signals that appear, at first, to resemble the pulses emitted by underwater locator beacons attached to flight recorders. For several days, attention narrows to one patch of ocean. An autonomous underwater vehicle called Bluefin 2-1 descends and maps the seabed. Nothing from MH370 is found. Later analysis concludes that the signals were unlikely to have come from the aircraft's recorders. The ocean has offered a convincing false path. This early acoustic search also reveals how easily urgency can turn limited information into hope. The underwater beacons attached to the recorders were expected to transmit for about a month. Every day mattered. Search crews knew that a real signal might weaken and then stop before the equipment could be brought close enough to confirm it. The pressure to investigate anything plausible was therefore entirely reasonable, even when the result was another empty area of seabed. For a moment, allow the maps to lose their sharpness. Imagine only the surface. Grey water lifting and falling beneath a long horizon, an aircraft circling far above, and a ship moving slowly through a region larger than the eye can understand. The first weeks of searching have not located the aircraft, but they have transformed the question. MH370 is no longer believed to be waiting somewhere along its route to Beijing. The investigation is now looking south, towards one of the most remote stretches of ocean on Earth. The next phase will no longer be a search of the surface alone. It will become a search of the seabed. With the southern Indian Ocean identified as the most likely resting place of the aircraft, the search changes character. The surface can be watched from aircraft and satellites. The seabed must be approached slowly through sound. Before detailed sonar work can begin, ships map the depth and shape of the ocean floor. In places, this seabed has never been surveyed with the resolution required for a search like this. Underwater mountains rise thousands of meters from the deep. Ridges, steep slopes, landslide debris, and volcanic terrain create shadows and shapes that can resemble wreckage on a sonar screen. The remoteness affects every part of the operation. Ships carry spare parts, fuel, technicians, and weeks of provisions because returning to port is not a small interruption. Data gathered underwater must be processed aboard the vessel and then reviewed again on land. A feature detected on one pass may require a second voyage weeks later. From October 2014, specialized vessels begin moving across a carefully defined corridor along the seventh arc. Ships including Fugro Discovery, Fugro Equator, and Go Phoenix tow sonar equipment above the seabed in long, overlapping lines. A single pass can take hours, a narrow strip can take days. Weather can force a vessel away before one more line is completed. The process is patient by necessity. Sound travels down through kilometers of water, strikes the bottom, and returns as an image built from echoes. Analysts study pale textures for anything unnatural, a straight edge, a field of scattered objects, a shadow inconsistent with the surrounding geology. Promising contacts are reviewed and, when necessary, revisited with cameras or remotely operated vehicles. Old shipwrecks are discovered, cables and geological formations appear, the missing aircraft does not. The work is shared across borders. Malaysia, Australia, and China fund the principal government search, while specialists from several countries contribute satellite analysis, aircraft performance modeling, oceanography, sonar interpretation, and accident investigation. The operational cost becomes extraordinary, but the task remains simple to state: find the aircraft, recover the recorders, and replace inference with evidence. Between 2014 and January 2017, the Australian-led underwater search examines more than 120,000 square kilometers of seabed. The scale is difficult to feel from a map. It is an area larger than many countries, surveyed through comparatively narrow strips in water where equipment failures and storms can cost entire days. When the agreed priority area has been covered without locating the aircraft, the search is suspended in January 2017. Officials do not declare that the mystery has been solved. They state that new evidence would be needed to define a more specific place to look. In January 2018, Ocean Infinity begins another search under a no-find, no-fee arrangement. Instead of relying only on one towed system, the company deploys multiple autonomous underwater vehicles, each capable of traveling independently and scanning large areas before returning with its data. The technology covers ground more quickly, but speed cannot replace the missing final coordinate. After several months, this search also ends without locating the main wreckage. By then, the combined searches have mapped landscapes that were previously almost unknown. Ridges, valleys, extinct volcanoes, and old shipwrecks resting far beyond sunlight. The search has expanded human knowledge of the ocean floor, while failing at the one purpose for which it was undertaken. The absence does not mean that the aircraft cannot be there. Sonar coverage is extensive, not infinite. Terrain can interfere with instruments. Search boundaries depend upon assumptions about speed, fuel, autopilot behavior, wind, and the final descent. A small change in one assumption can move the most likely impact point by many kilometers. Over the following years, investigators and independent technical groups return to the satellite data, debris drift, and earlier search coverage. Some propose a narrower area, adjusted from the places already examined. Every proposal must answer two questions. Why should the aircraft be there, and why was it not detected before? You do not need to hold the names of the vessels, the dimensions of each search box, or the shape of every underwater ridge in your mind tonight. It is enough to imagine the work. A ship moves slowly beneath a clouded sky. Several kilometers below it, an autonomous vehicle follows a programmed line through complete darkness. Its lamps illuminate only a small space ahead. Its sonar reaches farther, drawing the unseen landscape one strip at a time. Above, the ocean continues moving. Below, the vehicle continues searching. And between them lies a depth so great that the surface and seabed seem to belong to different worlds. For years, specialists return to this water because the answer is believed to be somewhere within it. The search pauses, resumes, changes equipment, and changes boundaries. It does not become easy. It simply becomes more precise. While ships and underwater vehicles search the deep southern ocean, the sea begins, in its own unhurried way, to offer a different kind of evidence. On 29 July 2015, a maintenance worker walking the shoreline of Reunion Island finds a large piece of debris among the rocks. The island lies in the western Indian Ocean, thousands of kilometers from the principal underwater search area. The object is a flaperon, a movable control surface from the trailing edge of a wing. Barnacles and marine growth cover parts of it, showing that it has spent a long time in the water. The flaperon is taken to France for examination. Its construction identifies it as part of a Boeing 777, and internal markings connect it to the aircraft registered 9 meters, MRO. 17 months after MH370 disappeared, the first confirmed physical part of the aircraft has reached land. The discovery changes the mystery in an important way. It supports the conclusion drawn from the satellite data. The flight ended in the Indian Ocean. It also demonstrates how far debris can travel while investigators search somewhere else entirely. During the months and years that follow, additional fragments are found along the coasts of Mozambique, South Africa, Tanzania, Madagascar, Mauritius, and nearby islands. Some are located by official teams, others are noticed by people walking beaches who simply recognize that a broken panel or curved piece of composite material looks unusual among the seaweed and driftwood. Investigators classify the pieces carefully. Some are confirmed as coming from MH370. Others are considered almost certain or highly likely. A number are rejected as unrelated ocean debris. One traveler, Blaine Gibson, becomes an unusually persistent, independent searcher. Guided partly by drift analysis and local knowledge, he walks shorelines in Mozambique, Madagascar, and neighboring regions. Several items he helps locate are later assessed as likely or confirmed parts of MH370. His method contains no dramatic technology. Travel, ask questions, search slowly, and return to places the wider world has stopped watching. The recovered items include parts associated with the wing, sections of fairing, interior panels, and pieces linked to the engine cowling. They reveal that the aircraft broke apart, but they do not establish whether the breakup occurred during the final descent, at impact, or through a sequence that cannot be reconstructed from the fragments alone. For the families, each discovery brings a difficult combination of confirmation and incompleteness. A fragment can establish that the aircraft reached the ocean, but it cannot explain why. It can end one rumor while leaving the central loss untouched. The flight recorders are not among them. Those two instruments were designed to preserve the information missing from every other source: aircraft data and cockpit sound. Their underwater locator beacons could transmit only for a limited period. Their casings were built to survive severe conditions, but no one can know their present state without finding the wreckage itself. Oceanographers study the recovered debris as evidence of movement. Currents in the Indian Ocean form broad, slow systems. Wind acts differently upon a panel floating high in the water than upon a heavier object riding almost beneath the surface. Marine growth changes weight and drag. Storms disturb routes that appear smooth on a model. Researchers compare discovery dates and locations with computer simulations. Physical replicas are built and released into the ocean so that the behavior of the flaperon can be observed rather than merely estimated. The resulting drift studies help test which parts of the seventh arc remain consistent with the evidence. For families, every fragment carries two meanings at once. It is evidence that the aircraft was real, physical, and somewhere within the ocean rather than hidden in an abstract theory. Yet it is also only a fragment. It cannot explain the turn near Igari. It cannot reveal who was conscious during the final hours. It cannot say why no call reached the ground. The sea has returned pieces, but not the story connecting them. Let the distant coastline soften now. Imagine a fragment that has traveled for months beneath sun, cloud, and night, carried without intention from one side of an ocean to the other. Waves lift it, wind alters its direction. Time removes any sense of urgency from its movement. Eventually, it reaches a quiet shore. Someone notices it, and, for a moment, the immense search becomes small enough to hold in two hands. Without the flight recorders or the main wreckage, every serious explanation for MH370 must be tested against an incomplete collection of evidence: radar positions, satellite handshakes, aircraft performance, recovered debris, and the absence of any distress message. Several broad possibilities remain. None has been proved beyond reasonable doubt. The first category involves an accident or system failure. A fire could interrupt electrical power and communications. Rapid decompression or a failure of pressurization could incapacitate people at altitude while the aircraft continued under autopilot. Aviation history contains accidents in which a silent aircraft remained airborne after everyone capable of responding had lost consciousness. A complex electrical event might also explain why some systems stopped communicating while others later returned. These scenarios deserve consideration, and the official investigation did not eliminate them completely. The absence of a distress call does not prove that no emergency occurred. A crew dealing with smoke, electrical disruption, or sudden loss of pressure may have very little time, and radio communication can fail precisely when it is most needed. But any accidental scenario must still account for the route changes and the long continuation of the flight. Yet the known path creates difficulties for a single, simple failure. The loss of communications occurred in stages rather than as one simultaneous collapse. The aircraft made a major turn away from its filed route, crossed peninsular Malaysia, and changed direction again near Penang. Investigators found those maneuvers difficult to attribute to one anomalous aircraft system alone. Reconstruction work suggested that the initial turnback was likely made with manual control. That still does not identify a person or a motive. A likely manual input is not proof of who made it. It is not proof that the person intended the final outcome. The investigation could not establish whether anyone other than the designated pilots flew the aircraft, and it could not exclude intervention by a third party. The debris does not settle the argument. Examinations suggested that the right outboard flap was probably retracted when it separated from the wing, but the available pieces were insufficient to determine whether the final impact was controlled, uncontrolled, or preceded by an in-flight breakup. Even apparently precise physical clues return us to uncertainty. The second broad category, therefore, involves deliberate human action. Some analysts argue that the pattern of communication loss and route changes is more consistent with knowledgeable manipulation than with an accidental chain of failures. The official report stated that the systems may have been manually turned off, left unused, or lost power, whether intentionally or otherwise. It also concluded that the path changes likely resulted from systems being manipulated, while stopping far short of naming a responsible individual. The captain's home flight simulator became one of the most discussed details in the public record. Police recovered thousands of coordinates, most of them ordinary game data. 7 manually programmed waypoints could be connected into a route from Kuala Lumpur through the Andaman Sea towards an area south of the Indian Ocean. But the forensic report could not determine whether those points came from one session or several files. It found no data showing a flight matching MH370's route and concluded that there were no unusual activities beyond game-related flight simulations. The detail is relevant because investigators examined it. It is not, by itself, proof of intent or guilt. For a moment, allow the theories to remain outside the cabin. Return instead to the only signals that continued for most of the night. The satellite handshakes were not messages written by a person. They were routine exchanges between equipment aboard the aircraft, a satellite above the Indian Ocean, and a ground station in Australia. Engineers extracted 2 useful measurements from them. The first, known as burst timing offset, reflected how long the signal took to travel. It placed the aircraft somewhere along a broad arc at each exchange. The second burst frequency offset reflected a slight change in frequency associated with relative motion. By comparing it with known behavior of the satellite and similar aircraft, specialists could test whether a proposed route was moving north or south and whether it remained physically plausible. The method was inventive, but it was not magical. It could narrow the world to a corridor. It could not point to one exact place on the seabed. The 2 unanswered satellite telephone calls placed from the ground during the night also matter. The aircraft's satellite equipment responded to the network, but no person answered. This confirms that a communications link existed at those moments. It does not reveal whether anyone in the cockpit heard the calls, could answer them, or understood that they were occurring. The final log-on request at about 8:19 in the morning, Malaysian time, is generally interpreted as being associated with an interruption and restoration of electrical power after fuel exhaustion. Analyses of the signal are consistent with the aircraft descending near the 7th arc. The precise manner of that descent remains uncertain. Drawing all of this together, the most defensible outline is narrow. The aircraft left its planned route. Its communications ceased in a pattern difficult to explain through one simple fault. It remained airborne for more than 7 hours after departure, most likely with some form of automatic flight control functioning for much of that time. It ended in the southern Indian Ocean. Beyond that outline, the central questions remain open. Who, if anyone, was controlling the aircraft during each stage? What happened inside the cockpit and cabin? Was the loss of communication intentional, accidental, or part of a more complicated event? The investigation could not determine the real cause. You do not need to choose an answer tonight. People with access to far more data than we have here could not choose one with certainty either. Let the possibilities stand at a distance, like several paths disappearing into the same dark horizon. There is no need to walk down any of them before you sleep. Where official evidence reaches its limit, public imagination often continues without it. MH370 disappeared in an age when many travelers assumed that a large modern aircraft could always be followed. Phones carried maps, satellites photographed the Earth. Aircraft crossed continents under radar and radio supervision. The idea that a Boeing 777 could leave its route, remain airborne for hours, and still avoid discovery felt impossible to many people. When an event feels impossible, theories begin by trying to make it feel deliberate. Some suggested that governments possessed radar or intelligence information they had chosen not to reveal. The slow sharing of certain military radar details, differences between early official statements, and the international confusion of the first days gave this suspicion room to grow. No confirmed evidence has demonstrated a coordinated international cover-up, but uncertainty about what different agencies knew and when they knew it continues to sustain public doubt. Another theory claimed that the aircraft landed secretly at a remote military base or isolated runway. In some versions, the passengers survived and were being held. In others, the aircraft was hidden for a later purpose. No credible physical evidence supports these claims. Concealing an entire Boeing 777, its passengers, its crew, and the operations needed to receive it would require an extraordinary number of people to remain silent across many years. The confirmed debris recovered in the Indian Ocean makes an intact secret landing even more difficult to reconcile with the evidence. A related possibility involves hijacking or unlawful interference without a public demand. This category cannot be dismissed merely because no group claimed responsibility. The official investigation itself stated that third-party intervention could not be excluded. Yet no ransom request, political message, authenticated communication, or reliable evidence of a surviving group ever appeared. It remains a broad possibility rather than a demonstrated explanation. And then there is the theory promised near the beginning of tonight's story. The claim that MH370 was taken or interfered with by something not of ordinary human origin. The extraterrestrial theory exists in several forms. Some versions imagine an unidentified craft approaching the aircraft over the sea. Others describe lights or small objects surrounding it before it disappears. More elaborate internet stories claim that secret satellite or aerial footage shows the Boeing 777 being removed from ordinary space in an instant. These ideas are visually powerful. They turn an invisible failure of information into a scene that can be understood at once. A dark aircraft, strange lights, and a disappearance. That simplicity is one reason the theory has survived online. A technical explanation involving radar modes, satellite frequency shifts, fuel endurance, and ocean drift takes hours to understand. An image of something extraordinary taking the aircraft requires only a second. But a memorable image is not evidence. No authenticated military recording, civil radar return, satellite image, crew report, or verified witness account shows an unknown craft approaching MH370. No official investigation body has treated extraterrestrial involvement as a credible hypothesis. Images and videos circulated online have not been validated as original sensor records from the search, nor have they been connected reliably to the aircraft. More importantly, the known timeline does not resemble an aircraft removed from the sky in one sudden moment. After the transponder signal disappeared near Igari, military radar continued to follow a target consistent with MH370 as it turned back across Malaysia and moved northwest through the Strait of Malacca. The aircraft's satellite system then exchanged automatic signals for hours. Those handshakes changed in ways consistent with a long flight south and an eventual end near the seventh arc. And physical pieces of the Boeing 777 later crossed the Indian Ocean and reached shore. An extraordinary theory would therefore have to explain the radar path, the prolonged satellite communication, the fuel endurance, the final logon, and the confirmed debris. The extraterrestrial story does not provide evidence that accounts for those facts. It usually avoids them. This does not mean the people drawn to the theory are foolish. Unresolved disasters create a particular discomfort. The mind prefers a complete story, even an unlikely one, to a blank space. When official explanations remain incomplete for years, people begin to fill the silence with patterns. Every delayed announcement appears suspicious. Every unexplained technical detail becomes a door. Every blurry image seems capable of containing the missing answer. The alien theory is therefore useful in a different way. It tells us something about the cultural life of a mystery. MH370 became more than an aircraft investigation. It became a symbol of disappearance in a world that believed disappearance was no longer possible. The less visible the real evidence became, electronic timings, sonar strips, fragments on distant beaches, the more vivid the imagined explanations grew. In a single image, A strange light above an aircraft can express the emotional question immediately. What could take something so large without leaving an answer behind? Inside the story, however, we can be more precise. Nothing in the verified evidence indicates visitors from beyond Earth. The theory belongs to internet folklore, not to the body of serious aviation investigation. And the real mystery remains powerful without it. A large aircraft changed course. Its normal communications ended. It crossed a country under military radar, continued for hours beneath a silent sky, and entered one of the most remote oceans on Earth. Human systems recorded enough to prove that the flight continued, but not enough to reveal why. That quieter truth is less spectacular than a portal in the clouds. It is also far more unsettling. You have now reached the extraordinary possibility mentioned near the beginning, and you may set it down without carrying it further. Let the strange lights fade first. Let the imagined shapes disappear into cloud. What remains is the low, steady darkness of the real ocean, and a question that still has no confirmed final answer. There is nothing you need to fear in that uncertainty tonight. It can remain far away, beyond the walls of the room, while your breathing continues at its own quiet pace. The search for MH370 has never reached a formal answer. After the first government-funded underwater search ended in 2017, and Ocean Infinity's 2018 effort also failed to locate the wreckage, the case remained open but largely paused. New technical analyses continued. Families and independent researchers kept asking governments to return to the Seventh Arc whenever a credible new search area could be defined. In 2025, Ocean Infinity returned under a new agreement with the Malaysian government based on the no-find, no-fee principle. The proposed area covered approximately 15,000 square kilometers of seabed in the southern Indian Ocean. Operations under that agreement took place in two phases, a short phase in March 2025 and another between 31 December 2025 and 23 January 2026. Across 28 operational search days following the signing of the agreement, approximately 7,571 square kilometers of the defined seabed were surveyed. No finding confirmed the location of the main wreckage. Weather and sea conditions repeatedly interrupted the work, a reminder that even modern autonomous vehicles remain dependent upon the surface environment above them. On 29 June 2026, Malaysia announced that the agreement would be extended for 12 months, from 1 July 2026 until 30 June 2027. The extension preserves the no-find, no-fee arrangement and is intended to allow Ocean Infinity to complete the remaining 7,428.54 square kilometers. The official statement indicated that the principal search assets could be rescheduled between November 2026 and April 2027 during the calmer season in the Southern Ocean. For the relatives of the 239 people aboard, a renewed contract is not the same as an answer. Anniversaries continue. Names are read. Photographs are carried into rooms where officials and reporters gather for a few hours before returning to ordinary schedules. For the families, the case has never become historical in the way it has for much of the public. So, as this story is told, the search is not merely a chapter from the past. It is unfinished work. The wreckage has not been located. The flight recorders remain unrecovered. The precise sequence of events after the final radio call remains unknown. We began tonight in a bright terminal at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. We watched an ordinary departure move into the dark. We followed a calm handover call, a disappearing transponder label, a primary radar target crossing Malaysia, and automatic signals exchanged with a satellite far above the Indian Ocean. We followed search aircraft over rough water and underwater vehicles through darkness. We watched fragments travel west with the currents until they reached beaches thousands of kilometers away. We considered accidents, deliberate action, secret landings, and the strange stories that grew online when the evidence could not provide a complete ending. And now we have arrived at the same boundary reached by the investigators. The evidence shows a route into the southern Indian Ocean. It does not yet reveal the complete reason. You do not need to carry that unfinished question into the rest of your night. Let the technical words loosen first. Burst timing offset. The seventh arc, primary radar. They can lose their definitions now and become only distant sounds. Let the final radio call move farther away. It was calm when it was spoken. It can remain calm as it fades. Let the maps fold themselves closed. Let every coordinate become plain dark water, rising and falling beneath a sky without edges. The sea itself can grow quieter in your imagination. Waves that seemed immense can become a slow, repeating rise and fall. The cold depth can remain far below, beyond anything you need to picture clearly. The ships may continue without your attention. Their sonar can pass slowly over the seabed while you rest. The autonomous vehicles do not require anyone on shore to remain awake. They follow their programmed lines through cold darkness, gathering information one quiet strip at a time. And here, in the room around you, there is no aircraft cabin and no distant ocean. There is only the familiar surface beneath your body, the ordinary air of the room, a blanket resting without movement, the small sounds of a building settling into night. If a number or name returns to you, let it pass without holding it. It does not need an answer from you. It only needed to be heard once and then allowed to move on. The passengers cannot tell us what happened. It is those left behind who continue to wait, and those still searching who continue the work. For tonight, you may leave the question with them. You may allow the horizon to darken. You may allow the engine hum to become softer and softer again, until it is no longer an engine at all, but only the quiet background of sleep. There is nowhere else you need to go. Nothing more you need to solve. The story can remain unfinished, and you may rest.